So thank you everybody for attending. I think we will keep to time, and we'll kick off now. Hopefully we'll have a few more people come in and join us. We had some really great names come through on both LinkedIn, and it was great seeing your registrations flow through. And I just want to welcome you all to our initial education focused event at Communiteer. So we've been running events now probably within the community space now for a good 12 months. But this is our first, since our pilot of our Pathway to Employment campaign last year, this is our first focused education event where we can all come together and discuss, you know, things, challenges and situations I think that COVID has brought about in the education space around where it's focused around that community service and community impact. So today's topic is broadening education. So creating opportunities for students to find their career pathway. Another way that I like to look at this is that, you know, we've got a bunch of students where their career pathways are really targeted or very specific, but then we've also got a bunch of students where they've got such variety. And we want to talk about today about how our programs and how, you know, there are ways out there, various ways to be able to give those students a more defined career path or help them find their way a little bit more. So I'm going to kick off talking about who we are at Communiteer. So some of you will already know who we are because I can see some familiar faces. But just to, I guess, give you the brief that Communiteer is a social enterprise. We call ourselves a social good network. And we are essentially, we started out as a tech platform focused on skilled volunteering for social impact. And we've really evolved into being a tech platform with a very much a programmatic approach. And so today what we're really talking about is programs and just how those programs have impact, how they affect, etc. So, you know, for us, Communiteer is about bringing volunteering, and today we'll be talking about the mentoring experience to create a more guided experience for students for their transition into the workforce. And we couple that with social impact. The pathway to employment has never been more uncertain and very competitive. And as we know, COVID has thrown us these last 2 years such curveballs. That students need to find creative and new ways, that's access, connections, guidance and opportunities, you know, to give them that ability to tackle real challenges outside the classroom. So the programs we talk about, it's about empowering the students, developing their transferable skills, establishing their professional networks, establishing relationships within those professional networks, and building their awareness of these social challenges. And that will form the foundation of their career, but it won't just form the foundation of their career, it will also help turn them into, you know, great corporate citizens. And that's sort of what we want to talk about today. So the issues that we identified that we've sort of looking to talk on. So Liv, next slide. Great. I've already talked about that not all students have a clear career path, and others often disengage along the way. So we want to talk about how can university further support and engage with these students, and what are employers looking for when hiring graduates, and how can we really couple together what part does social impact and community service play in that space along the way. So with Communiteer, we look at how we can help, or sort of the 3 areas that we've identified in the education space, sorry, I should say, of how we can help is boosting employability scores by building the students' confidence and skills. We're also finding that feedback from students in their surveys and etc. are lifted in this space as well through participating in programs such as ours. We help improve course relevance and create social impact. So everything we do comes with that social impact lens. We support not-for-profits and social enterprises through the work that we do. And our main charter is to amplify social impact. And the way we've designed these programs, next slide please, Liv, is through all of our programs are designed around these 3 circles. Next one along. and that's around awareness, experience, and connection. So everything that we do with our programmatic approach is to ensure that we're providing the students with these 3 key areas. And we've also found that this is really relevant in our corporate space as well, which is quite interesting when you think about it, that the 2 spaces are quite different, but there's so much crossover as well. So with the awareness, we like to provide them with the ability to learn about social causes and to learn about creating impact, building great social, what I like to call them corporate citizens, is all in that learning phase. We give them experience by giving them the opportunity to help a not-for-profit and build transferable and technical skills through doing. And then connection, which I guess you can sort of look in that mentoring piece, but also working with the not-for-profits through some of our other programs, and that helps them build relationships with corporate professionals as well as building relationships with not-for-profits. The other thing that Communiteer do is that we base all of this on the SDGs, and the 2 SDGs that we really support in the education space currently is SDG 4 and SDG 8. So SDG 4 is quality education, and SDG 8 is decent work and economic growth. And so it's decent work and economic growth through quality education is how we boost these key areas that you can see on the screen. Sorry, my slides are a little bit behind. There we go. We've got that. Lovely. And then we're just going to pop on to the next slide, and that's just really to talk about our partnership with AVI. So today we've got AVI here with us, and they will talk further about the Pathway to Employment program and the pilot that we did with them at the end of last year in creating this program. And it's really been from the success of that program and the creation of that program that has allowed Communiteer to really build the programming that we've got in the education space at the moment. And I think at last count this morning when I was talking with Victor was that we had roughly another 5 programs currently built or piloting within the education space. So it's really exciting to see that approach starting to come to life. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to AVI to, I guess, introduce themselves, because I don't think I can do it justice, and to talk about, how we work together within this part.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So just to, before I introduce Pathway to Employment, I'd like to just give a little bit of a history about AVI. Many of you will know who we are, and some of you may not. So a very, very short, sharp potted history. AVI is historically an international development organisation. We work in roughly 28 countries around the world, and we also have a very strong presence here in Australia. We've been working with universities for about 12 years now, predominantly in international mobility, but our experiences from international mobility have really helped to shape what we do here in Australia around, particularly in terms of the Pathway to Employment program. A lot of the work that we do with universities, students will gain academic credit, and in the process, so they'll do an internship or a placement with a partner organisation in one of the countries that we work with. They'll get academic credit, and in the process of doing that, that placement, they will also gain valuable skills and cross-cultural experience and learning. Our main approach to development is through what we call volunteering for development, for people-to-people development. We send skilled Australians into developing countries to work on projects for about 6 to 12 months to help strengthen the capacity of people, systems, and process. And mentoring with students, I suppose, for us is a really fundamental way to help strengthen capacity and share skills, knowledge, and experience. The photograph that you can see on the slide there, the gentleman on the right is a man by the name of Herb Feith. And Herb was our very, very first volunteer for development. So AVI was established in 1951, essentially out of a youth movement, when Herb Feith, who was back then a graduate from he was a graduate student from the University of Melbourne. Herb went into Indonesia, and he actually worked as a translator with the Ministry of Information. He didn't go to Indonesia to just share his knowledge from the studies that he'd done, but he went to participate in the life of the newly formed independent society. He didn't see himself as somebody who was there to impart knowledge onto others, but rather he remained open to learning. He was open to being participatory. He knew what he knew, but he also knew that there was a lot that he didn't know and that he was there to learn. He saw his time in Indonesia as a real opportunity to discover new things, but also to discover things about himself. Herb put a lot of effort into building relationships. He willingly and openly shared his experience and stories with his Indonesian colleagues, and he also listened to their stories with deep intent. He was open to them and they opened up to him. And the more that he opened up to them, the more that they opened up to him. The more he understood about himself, the more he understood, I suppose, about his partners and his colleagues, the more he started to learn about himself. And some of these sort of qualities and these things that I'm speaking about are really fundamental to the mentoring experience. This spirit of reciprocity, I suppose, is really fundamental for us in terms of the mentor-mentee relationship. And it's been part of the intrinsic design behind Pathway to Employment. I want to share a little story about Herb, which was that, Herb really immersed himself in the culture. He immersed himself in learning language, in participating in cultural activities. He lived his life in Indonesia just like his Indonesian colleagues did. He ate lunch from a banana leaf while all the other expats were sitting in cafes and eating Western food. His main approach was really around seeking to understand rather than being understood. And the reason I'm sharing so much about Herb is that we really believe that his journey and his story and the story and the journey of PTE, Pathway to Employment, is critical for students. His willingness to share his skills and his knowledge and experience has been part of what's been fundamental in the Pathway to Employment experience. He shared his understanding of the world. He took an active interest in the life of others. He made other people feel valued, and he ensured that he was really hearing what his counterparts, his mentees, were saying. And all of these things we know are fundamental to setting up that mentor-mentee relationship. So we designed, maybe the next slide, Olivia. So we designed Pathway to Employment through this, sort of worm journey, if you like. It's a 5-step process. The 5-step journey of the Pathway to Employment program is about engagement. So we engage the mentors and the mentees by preparing them for their journey. So whether you're a mentor or whether you're a mentee, through Pathway to Employment, we understand that there's some preparation work that needs to happen so that people feel that they have the skills and the resources that equips them for taking on one of those 2 roles. We then plan with the mentor and the mentee in terms of what is it that you might need to put in as a mentor and what might you need to put in as a mentee to get some value out of this relationship. There's a meeting of the mentor-mentee. Through COVID, obviously that meeting was all virtual, but we did encourage mentors and mentees, and we have heard some stories where people did actually end up being able to meet up because they were in the same city, so they were able to meet up over coffee and things like that. And we asked the mentor and mentee to commit to a 12-week program. Now that 12-week program is in some ways structured in that it provides some structure. We give the mentor and the mentee some topics that they go through every week. So one week there might be a segment and a topic around vulnerability and what it means to be vulnerable. We share contemporary resources, TED Talks, YouTube videos, articles, all that kind of stuff to help guide the conversations between a mentor and a mentee. So we understand what it is that students, young people, graduates who are entering into the workforce, we understand some of the barriers, we understand some of the the pitfalls, the conundrums, the whatever you want to call it that they face. And we've crafted this 12-week program to kind of help unpack some of those. And the role of the mentor is really about the mentor sharing their stories, because often they've had the same pitfalls and conundrums and challenges themselves. Through this 12-week program, which is the emerge phase, the mentor and the mentee meet up every week. They will have maybe some shared objectives and some agreements on what it is that the two can offer each other. And then they work through, they're guided through, perhaps is a better way, the 12-week program that we have outlined. They then complete the 12 weeks. There's lots of opportunity for review and reflection. And there's also what we call sustain, whereby the mentor and the mentees can choose of their own volition to stay together as a mentor-mentee match. And what we have heard, what we know from the previous pilots that we've done, is that there are many mentors and mentees who have chosen to stay together because the mentor is getting as much out of the relationship as the mentee is. And in terms of the pilot, the other thing that we tested was that there were a number of mentors who themselves were wanting to take on more senior roles within their organization. They were wanting to take on roles whereby they would need to guide, lead, manage, supervise people, but they had never had that opportunity to do so through their career pathway. So the PTE program also offered these would-be supervisors, managers, opportunity for them to develop some of their skills around mentoring, guiding, supporting, supervising a person. So that was sort of, in a sense, maybe a little bit of an unintended consequence of the Pathway to Employment program, and one that we're really proud of, because one of the things that we fundamentally know about volunteering is that you gain what you give. And in a sense, that's really critical to Pathway to Employment. The mentee will gain by putting themselves out there, by being open and by being vulnerable and by giving, by stepping outside of their comfort zone. And the mentor will also gain the same if they are prepared to share their stories, share their failures, share their pitfalls. I'm sure all of you on screen have had your own moments where you can reflect back and think, oh, if only somebody had shared that with me when I was starting out as a graduate, then maybe I wouldn't have had the rocky start to my career that I did, or maybe I would have been able to kind of overcome some of my own challenges a bit more. And that, in a sense, is part of what we wanted to do in designing the Pathway to Employment program, is so that graduates can have a touch point, somebody who can act as a mentor, not just as a supervisor, because we know that there is a big difference between a supervisor, who would often be very task oriented, and a mentor who's more invested in you, the person. And so hopefully you can see through the story I shared with Herb Feith how some of the characteristics of his volunteer experience and his mentoring experience resonates within the Pathway to Employment campaign. So I might stop there, Michelle, and hand it back to you.
Thanks, Ipshita. I love those stories, and thank you very much for sharing them with us all. And I guess it's got to the favourite part, I think, for me, of the session, where we can come together, I guess, as a panel. And today we've brought together the three people that you can see up on the screen, are the lovely Chris from Macquarie Uni, Ipshita, who you've just heard from ABI, and Harrison, who is a student from, or was a student at Sydney University, and who completed our Pathway to Employment pilot. And I guess to add to what Ipshita was saying is that there's another great element that has come out of the Pathway to Employment, and that is where the mentee has gone on to then help not-for-profits, and Harrison is one of those mentees, to go on and take on some projects and to really complete that volunteering journey that Ipshita spoke about, and the volunteering journey that really started this whole program. And we're really using that program as the example today as to how the programmatic approach, and we've shown this through the pilot, can broaden, that career pathway journey. So without further ado, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. And then we've got some questions that we pre-formed earlier that we're just going to sort of, I guess, go through the panel and start a general discussion. But we want all of you to feel part of that. So please be active in the chat and add to the chat box any questions you would like to hear answered by the three panelists we've got up here. I'll, as they introduce themselves, that'll give you some time to think of anything that you may want to add to the discussion. But we've also allowed plenty of time at the end for questions and for a bit of breakout room time as well. So sit back, enjoy, but I want you to, yes, please feel free to use that chat box as frequently as you would like to really join in this conversation, because it really is a general conversation. So first I'm going to hand over to Chris to please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll go from Chris to Harrison, and then if Sheeta has already introduced herself, but we might kick off the questioning with you then following. So Chris, please take it away.
Thanks, Michelle. And yeah, it's really great to be part of this conversation. It's been so like Ipsita, I've learned so much about AVI. Of course, I've known about them, but wow, it's really interesting. Anyway, back on track. Yeah, I'm my name's Chris, and I've been involved in education and training with a particular focus on work integrated learning and employability for the past 12 years. So I've worked with students as the academic. I've read a lot of reflections. I've also done a lot of research. I've done research with other academics, as well as work supervisors on placement, graduate employers. And I've just something Ipsita was saying is very interesting, because I've just done a research impact project trying to discover what mentors can get out of the mentoring relationship, because I found in my interactions it's quite often overlooked. So that's really exciting. And my background is in tourism. That's what I did before I was in education. And tourism is one of the most, always has been one of the most highly networked industries in the world, and still is. And personal relationships are what it's all about. So thank you. Over to Harrison, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And thanks, Michelle, for a bit of an introduction before you stole a few things that I was going to say. But yeah, I'm Harrison. I'm actually still studying at the University of Sydney. So in my 4th year, doing a Bachelor of Commerce and Mechatronic Engineering. So that's a 5-year degree. Feels like I'm going to be in uni forever. But yeah, as Michelle said, I was part of the pilot program. Had a mentor, Martin from Roche, the pharmaceuticals company, and that was a fantastic experience. So yeah, looking forward to providing the student perspective. Back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Harrison. If Sheeta, is there anything else you want to add before we jump into our questions that we've got ready to go, or do you want to tackle the first question?
All right, hit me with the first question, Michelle.
So the first question that we've got is, what do you think are the main shortfalls slowing down students' transition into the labour market? And we're really interested in hearing it from your perspective. So your perspective, I think, in your role with AVI, what are you sort of seeing out there in the market?
Sure. I mean, we all know that there is, it is an employees market right now. There are loads and loads of jobs out there ready and waiting for people to apply for. But even within that, we still know that there's a lot of competition. And one of the things that I think is deeply challenging for students, in particular graduates, is that employers are still looking for experience. And so in the absence of experience, if I think about my own life experience, I studied social work after a 4-year degree. I didn't have what an organisation might consider to be classic clinical social work skills, albeit I did have placements that I had done that I could draw my experience from. But a lot of my friends who were in, say, and I think Harrison, you know, engineering, back then, engineering didn't have any practicum components. It was all pretty much theoretical. And so in the absence of a practice-based degree where you're actually going and using your skills in the workforce, what's the experience that you draw on? So I worked at Woolies from when I was 15 right until I sort of graduated, and I was able to draw on my customer service experience in my applications in terms of how I work with people, how I manage difficult situations and things like that. But what we've seen in the last couple of years, I think, is that having a part-time job at Macca's it's not the only thing that helps. It's one part of it. And so really demonstrating that how can you transfer your soft skills that you have into the workplace. And the other sort of shortfall, I think, for me is the creating of networks and connections and opportunities. The lack of that, I think, really puts graduates at it's sort of a bit of a disservice, if you like. I was really lucky to have great mentors through my career, through my life at a very early age, and mentors who weren't even from the social work sort of sector, just mentors in general. And those mentors opened up networks. They opened up their black books. They opened up connections for me that has helped me to get to where I am. And I think that's one of the things that I really value about Pathway to Employment is that, and I think Harrison can probably really speak to this in a sense, that when you make that connection between a mentor and mentee, what are the doors that can be opened up for the students as a result? So I think I'll stop there for now, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Yipshita. I really relate to that. And I think from my generation, very much so. But now there are some, as you said, broader challenges around networks and relationships. And I'm going to throw it over to Chris, because Chris, you had some amazing insights when we were talking, or some great insights from the research that you're doing around that relationship building and around how, I guess, how you can, I know the question was, what do you think the main shortfalls are in slowing that transition? But I'm really interested to hear your insights on that relationship and networking. And then also, are there any other attributes, in your research that sort of you think are contributing to that?
Okay, thanks, Michelle. And I'll just maybe start by elaborating on something that Yipshita just mentioned. And that is the ability to develop networks and develop mentoring relationships. And I did some research 2 years ago, and it was on social networks. And what we did interviews with graduates who we defined as successful networkers, and they reflected on what they'd done. They were alumni who had graduated for between 2 and 5 years. But we did these interesting, they diagrammed, they drew out their network connections while they were in uni, after they graduated, and continuing. And what was really interesting, this is the interesting part, was that it was the students who had worked to maximize, and they could draw it, you could see it in the diagrams, to maximize the networks and link them together. And some of these links went throughout their whole career. And they were networks with people they worked with at part-time jobs, people they worked with on internships, clubs, extracurricular activities, in class. They spanned the whole experience. And the other interesting thing was they realized it was their own self-agency. Like, it's not like it's a matter of luck, although sometimes it is. It is sometimes a matter of luck. But if you don't have the luck, you can do it by just being open to other people and being open to what opportunities that you actually have. And so that's what I found really, really interesting, was this sort of open mindset to seeking opportunities, and to also, again, as you mentioned at the beginning, reciprocity. That they realize that you learn that actually the relationship is, you're the student, but actually you can actually give back. There's always something that you can have of value that other people need. And that's a really, I think in all the research I've done, that one was kind of the most insightful to the value of developing networks. And so that kind of, yeah, as a career advisor, you hear sometimes from employers that say that they don't actually often see this kind of open learning mindset, openness to what other people on your team have to offer, what other stakeholders need. So I think that that is a really valuable lesson or shortfall that we can, not shortfall, but something to keep in mind, that you actually can develop your personal networks, even though you're just a student.
100%. And I guess that's where I'd like to throw, thank you for that, Chris, in toward Harrison. But I'm going to ask you one of the questions that we had down here. I'm going to sort of stick to the vision of a mutually beneficial mentee-mentor relationship, because I think that we've covered off really in what the two panelists have said around how that development of relationship is really important and how networking is really important. But I'd really like to sort of, I guess, yeah, hear from you what your take is on that, Harrison.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with everything that's been said so far. I think expanding your surface area for the luck that kind of might eventuate from knowing someone and networking is something that's really important, something that students can definitely do. Focusing in a bit more on the question, I think the reason that I had a successful and hopefully mutually beneficial relationship with my mentor came down to kind of open, honest, and vulnerable communication, firstly. I think it's really hard to be vulnerable, especially in a professional setting with someone in like a mentoring kind of situation. But I think if you are like truly open and honest, that's the only way you're going to achieve like actual legitimate outcomes. That's the only way that you're going to get advice that truly pertains to you. And that's the only way to kind of build that self-awareness that is one of the main things that you gain from a mentee perspective, is that self-awareness and that ability to reflect and to have that reflection prompted. In terms of it being, yeah, mutually beneficial for the mentor as well, I think, stressing the importance of just being a good person and making sure that you're kind of working with them. It's very easy to sit down and say, hey, look, this is who I am. Can I have some advice? It's a lot better to workshop those ideas and to be working with them and making that kind of two-way rather than just taking. Like I think Ipsita said, it's also about giving back.
And from your sort of, I guess, relationship with your mentor, was that part of what led you into also completing, projects and I guess moving into that volunteer space? Did that feel, were you volunteering before you had your relationship with your mentor-mentee, or did the, I guess, journey with your mentor lead you into, continuing on as a volunteer?
Yeah, look, I think volunteering is also always something that has been quite important to me. I'm a very value kind of driven person, and I think giving back is important. I come from a lot of privilege, and so recognizing that and being able to kind of give back is kind of essential. Definitely, my conversations with Martin, I guess we spoke about the importance of that. I also think volunteering in general is just a fantastic way, almost selfishly, to gain skills and to be put in a mock professional environment where you can learn communication, where you can practice practical skills, but also transferable skills. I mean, recognizing that my career is most likely not going to be linear like it might have been 20, 30 years ago. I think there's an importance now to have transferable skills like communication, like leadership, teamwork. I mean, we all kind of figured out how important teamwork was when we were shut off from the world and had to transition to Zoom for 2 years. So those are the things that are really essential in building a strong platform for a career that's most likely going to transition across different areas. And I think volunteering is a fantastic first start to do that. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Harrison. I'm going to just shift over to Ipshita and just ask you that question of the vision of a mutually beneficial mentee-mentor relationship. I guess just given sort of the insight we've gotten from Harrison and, you know, from what we've learned from the program, and the pilot was awesome, by the way, because it just brought out so many other elements that we hadn't, you know, put in our, I guess, KPIs before we started. So please share some of those insights.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Harrison's reflections are the ones that really matter in this respect, because he, you know, and when we did the wrap-up workshop, I remember Harrison sort of shared some stories, and, you know, there were so many things that Harrison and his mentor did. You know, they, apart from taking it seriously, the mentor was able to offer some practical ideas. And if I'm remembering right, Harrison, I think your mentor might have helped you with one of your applications or something, is your CV or something like that. So some really practical stuff like, hey, I've got a CV, I've never shared it with anyone. What does it look like? And having somebody from Roche, and I think that was another thing I wanted to reflect on. You know, Harrison's an engineering student. We paired him up with someone from the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, it's like, huh, what the? But it worked because we were really conscious of not pairing people up with like for like disciplines. Having somebody from the pharmaceutical sector being paired up with an engineering student, for example, offers perspective. And I think Harrison had the benefit of some perspective from his mentor, who had, you know, sort of 25 years plus in the pharma industry. And that person had lived through, and, you know, a lot of ups and downs. He was able to share a lot of those insights with Harrison. And I think through that, you know, vulnerability, Harrison talked about vulnerable communication. We know that we all have to be vulnerable in the workplace. And so vulnerability was one of the key modules that we implemented in the 12-week program really early on, because if we can't be vulnerable, then it's going to be really hard to step through a lot of the workplace challenges. And a lot of the work that we have done with students in the past informed us that, in fact, being vulnerable is something that people were really uncomfortable with. So how do we do and create vulnerability through a mentor-mentee relationship where it's safe to be vulnerable? And so there's resources that we give the mentor so that they can help the student sit in that vulnerable space. One of the resources, for example, is both mentor and mentee get to watch the Brené Brown TED Talk on vulnerability. You know, and that just creates a really nice platform to have conversation, to share some stories. This was something that happened in my work or in my career or early on where I felt really vulnerable. This is how I felt. This is what I did. Do you want to, is there something that you can share as well? But just creating time and space to have those conversations, I think, adds to that mutually beneficial. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, just so that there's a little sense of comfort around this, is that we were actually quite picky in who we allowed and chose to be mentors. So Harrison referred to, the mentor being a good person. And the screening that we do of the mentors really helped to ensure that the mentor was able to give time to their mentee, that this was not just something that they were doing to get brownie points through work, or this wasn't just something because Roche had said, you have to do it. It was actually something that the mentors wanted to do, because if there's not that intrinsic, I want to do this motivation, then the mentor-mentee relationship won't be beneficial right up front. So we were really picky, and AVI helps Communiteer. We do the mentor-mentee matching together, and we screen the mentors to make sure that there is the motivation to really see this through for students so that they can get the best and the most out of this 12-week program.
That's a really great point, Tina. And I think also the element that we acknowledge the mentors as volunteers, as volunteering of their time. And we really, as part of this program, we take that forward and acknowledge it. And I think it does create a big difference in the time that they give and their availability. So yeah, it's a really great point. I want to sort of double back into a question, and Chris, this one I think I'm going to throw to you to start with. It's one of our pre-formed questions, and it's about asking what are the key differentiators that can make career-ready professionals. So how can we help students develop these assets? And I think I'm coming at it from the research that you have done around those key differentiators in getting the students to be career-ready.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Again, I think the focus for a lot of employers that I've talked to in my research and in my work is just that attitude and learning mindset, focusing on not only what you can do or what you can't do and what you need, that's good. I mean, employers want to know that you're interested in your own career, but not just learning the tasks and not just gaining the skills. Employers want to see that attitude where you're actually interested in learning about the needs of the team and actually contributing to the team by investing in relationships, investing in understanding. I think that's part of, I've heard it described as the edge of that gives you the edge as a graduate, and it's how you can contribute, and to do that you need to actually understand the people. So I think I mentioned a quote to you that I always remember, and it's a quote from a student, an alumnus who had been through a few internships. He'd also done volunteering, and he said, well, actually it's not about the tasks I did, the skills I did, but it's about the people I met. That was the value. And I think that I think that's part of the reason for his success. He did have he's got a very good career as an alumnus. So I really think that that's what makes employers sort of take note that they've got a quality person who cares. And something else, I'm just going to say one more thing, that how we can support. Maybe you guys have seen the TED Talk that one of the professors in Macquarie School of Business, Debbie Haskey-Levitt, she's given a TED Talk, and I think she comes from a background of volunteerism, but she's like, what we need to do is to get graduates to think about not how much money they can make or how much success they can have, but how much impact they can make as they graduate and go forward.
100%. That really resonates. It resonates with that social impact, to do all of these things with that lens of social impact over them, and I guess it's like a muscle. You build that into your DNA as you go out into the workforce to become, great corporate citizens. I just want to throw to the other panelists. Harrison, I know you had some notes. Any other key differentiators that I guess you came across with your through your time with Martin about making career-ready professionals?
Yeah, I guess the two main pillars that I kind of looked into was awareness and competency. So in awareness, I was looking at things like, well, actually, what kind of fields do I want to work in? Doing a dual degree means that I have a variety of eclectic interests. And so it was hard for me to kind of not look at a career as through the lens of opportunity cost. And I think a lot of students are in that position where they say, I've got this kind of broad degree, perhaps in the sciences or in engineering, And I'm not sure where specifically I want to go with that. And so awareness was one of the first big things in kind of making myself career ready, is knowing what career I kind of want to work towards. And then secondly, competency. And I think Chris and Ipsita have touched on that fantastically. But again, competency means not just hard skills, but also being work willing, being, a good communicator, a good leader, and being curious. And I think these are skills that people often look at as characteristics, as something inherent to your personality. But I disagree. I think like curiosity is a skill that can be learnt, something that you can practice and develop. And that's kind of something that we looked at as well, to make sure that we were all career ready.
Yeah, that's yeah, bang on. Ipsita, did you have anything else to add to that before I guess I double back around into our volunteering?
Yeah, sure.
Question?
Yeah, there's probably just a couple of things I think that are really key differentiators to creating global career-ready professionals. I think universities do try really hard through a whole range of activities, platforms, pillars to create career-ready professionals. I think we often experience great, an individual, fantastic, say, lecturer or tutor or something who takes the extra step to make that happen. And so one of the things that I reflect on in terms of what's needed is this notion of global citizenship. And I know that we talk about that a lot, but what does it actually mean to create global citizens, and why is that important? For me, the reason why that's important and necessary for students, even if they never work outside of Australia, the reality is pretty much any job that you do, pretty much every organisation, industry has some type of touch point globally. Whether they are, and an example that I gave recently was you might be working for the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre here in Melbourne, Australia, but what's happening in Ukraine right now, what's happening in Myanmar right now, absolutely has a fundamental impact and issue, a fundamental impact and on how we think about the issues in Australia and from the service provision of, say, that organisation. So even if you're never wanting to work outside of your own country, there is still a need to be good global citizens. And so in some ways, we at AVI, we promote international mobility for that very reason. But for students who can't do international mobility because their university doesn't offer it, it's out of their reach in terms of financial, there are other ways that you can tap into that. So if you've got a mentor who works for a global company, you can gain perspective through their experience. And that to me is really, really important. The other things I think are around cross-cultural experience. And I think Harrison and Chris have both talked about this, but cross-cultural experience is fundamental in shaping career-ready professionals. So cross-cultural is not just, do you know how to work with somebody who's Indian? It's cross-cultural experience in terms of working in an organisation that is all about people with disabilities, for example, or a women-led organisation. These days in most businesses, in most organisations, there are targets. We have, affirmative action in certain areas. This is all fantastic. But for students, for graduates, what does that mean? What does that look like? They're not exposed to it necessarily through university. Mentoring can help give some exposure to those things as well. And the other thing I think is around resilience and adaptability. So the key differentiators that I look for as an employer, is this somebody who is resilient? Is this somebody who can be adaptable? Is this somebody who's accountable? Can they work with limited resources? All that kind of stuff. And so again, volunteering helps to unpack some of that, and the mentor-mentee relationship can help to also unpack some of that for the student themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And you've almost really, just well-prepared panelists, because we had another question around volunteering and how can that develop your skills and enrich your learning experience to be more career ready. And Ipshita, you really just covered that right then. And Christine, you've referred to it as well, and Harrison, throughout sort of what you've been talking about, you've spoken to it as well. So I'm going to sort of round up on that question and see if we have any other insights to add. I've also noticed we've got some great questions coming through in the chat room. And we've allowed some time for 2 breakout rooms at the end of this session where Chris from Mac Uni and those of us from Communiteer, we're going to go into one room. And Harrison, if you will join Ipshita, if you've got time, into the other breakout room. I think we're going to have a little bit more time to, I guess, have a more open Microsoft generalized discussion, because one of those questions is, you know, how do we handle the challenges such as overdependence of mentees on their mentors? Or having unrealistic expectations by the mentees. And I think that's a great sort of piece to cover off. And the other question was in understanding student expectations around volunteer-based work integrated learning versus paid. And I think from a Communiteer perspective, and Chris, that's something that we've kind of really, you know, been talking about. It's been very front of mind. And what does that volunteer experience look like? And how can we, you know, what is that just community service? Is it part of work integrated learning? So we'll break out in a moment into those breakout rooms. But before we do, I just want to finish off the panel and say thank you, all 3 of you. And one last opportunity to see, is there any other thoughts on sort of how this volunteering experience coupled with pathway to employment can really help students develop their skills? I'm pretty sure you've covered up most of it, but I just wanted to make sure we sort of covered it all. So anything else, panelists? Did we miss anything?
I am happy to add one more thing. I just wanted to stress like the importance of conversation. I think as a student, like we hear so many different things and it's often almost information overload, and it's hard to discern, I guess, the signal from the noise, to use an engineering metaphor. But being able to sit down with a professional and just have an open and honest conversation about, hey, these are my thoughts, this is how I'm feeling, this is my position, is so crucial in getting good career advice and starting that journey. I think almost all of like the long-term career decisions that I have kind of circling around in my head are informed by conversation rather than anything else. And I think that that is like the most essential medium for kind of learning as a student for something that's so abstract as figuring out your future career path. So yeah, I'll pass it over to the other panelists for their final thoughts as well.
Thank you. Chris, any final thoughts on, you know, those topics we've covered off on today?
Yeah, lots of thoughts, but I'll just, because what Harrison just said is what students always say, and it's the feedback that you get from the people that you're involved with in any kind of internship, industry project, volunteer, service learning. It's always that quality of feedback that's so valuable. Yeah. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Chris. Ipshita, anything else to finish off there before we break out?
No, I think Harrison has summed it up perfectly. I really, yeah, that to me just absolutely is the reason why we created PTE.
Yeah, it 100% is. And it is so exciting that we've been able to bring this program into an ongoing program that we're delivering into the education space. And I guess really for me to finish off today is to thank the panelists once again. Thank all of you for attending and for your time, because I know our time is very precious and we're all very zoomed out at various points in time. We do hope to bring you these sessions face to face one day. We will keep working on that. But the call to action at the end of this, you know, I guess, great discussion today is we would like to continue and keep this discussion going. And so please reach out to us. Please look at the information and the case studies that we've got up on the Communiteer website. And we'd love to talk to you about how these programs would fit and work within your university, college, or place that you're coming from. So we've got some details to share, and we'll send all of that through to you after this event. I mean, do we want to go into breakout rooms, or do we want to sort of carry this discussion on? Because I know a few people have had to leave. No, I'm sort of taking a bit of a vote around there. Lucinda, I can see that you're still there, which is great. So I'd really love to sort of, I guess, unpack further the question that you shared with us, which was...
Oh, do you want to unpack that now?
Yeah, let's just continue the discussion a little further. I feel like we've got a couple of minutes and I'm not ready to leave
Okay.
yet.
I just had a question. I work with AVI with Ipshita, but previously I was with RMIT as their placement program manager for the planning area. So it's quite interesting and talking to students about when we were placing them, because most of our placements were paid under the work integrated learning, and just looking at, I guess, what the students' perceptions are about the value of volunteering placements, as opposed to, you know, I guess what they might consider the legitimacy of a paid placement. Yes. So I'm interested in the panel's thoughts, but I think that volunteering has like amazing opportunities. So yeah.
Yes. Does anybody want to jump in there and sort of take that one on, Chris?
Yeah, I'll try, because it, like, as you know, Lucinda, it's a really tricky, very tricky, very tricky, because as we all know, the exploitation that can occur, and that a lot of people have this impression of exploitation. But at the same time, from my perspective, and listen, I used to work at RMIT Vietnam. That's for 5 years. That's where I started. Yeah, that's where I started getting involved in work integrated learning. But anyway, I think the reciprocity element, that's you don't want either side to be exploited, clearly. So, for example, when I was working at Macquarie in the professional and community engagement division as an academic, our students, we had an in-curriculum program, which, so the students, they were getting something back. A lot of the placements were unpaid, but they were getting back, it was an elective, they didn't have to do it. So they were getting value in terms of their choice of an elective, they were getting a grade, they were getting a unit. So that's I guess part of it. But again, if you're doing something for like 6 months, maybe, then that's sort of, it's about balance, and that reciprocal balance is then, maybe, you have to give something. So I'm not really answering your question, but to me, it's a delicate thing. And you just have, the mutual value needs to be in balance somehow. That's the student perception. The students want these opportunities, and when we talk to them, and as you have your experience as a placement officer, when you have these conversations with them, you can see why they want to do it. And quite often, if the expectation is because I want to do it and it's going to give, it's going to be valuable for me, then that's up to them. But yeah, sorry, that's.
Yeah, I think also, like, I guess the mentoring component of it is a value add.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of those those sort of paid placements don't necessarily provide that. You might be lucky if you find yourself a mentor within that work placement, but you may not. You might be sitting in the corner by yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot of feedback from those that have participated in WIL programs with their NFPs, is that the involvement level of their skills and their knowledge and how they're regarded and included into the group as a volunteer staff member is way more valuable, and they felt more immersed than in a corporate or a more paid situation. So there's lots of learnings, and we've tried to distill those in some of our case studies that we've got on our website, but also, you know, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's within the case studies of sort of, I guess, that value of that feedback. So yeah. Anything else for our panelists or anybody else to add to that discussion?
As someone who's both worked paid and also volunteered, I think the important thing from a student's perspective is like realizing that there almost is a distinction in like what the student wants out of both of those kind of opportunities. I'm someone who's fortunate enough, like I live at home, I don't have to pay rent. And I've always loved volunteering because I think it's important, and it's a great way to build a sense of community and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. But I have friends who aren't in such a fortunate position, and they don't have the time with 40 hours a week of university and maybe 10 hours a week of part-time work to then do an additional volunteering thing. And for them, they need money. Students are very capital poor, and you know the price of 2-minute noodles is increasing. So there is a balance there, and it's about getting the right students and providing the right value as well. When I was in my first few years of university, almost all of the opportunities that I sought out were unpaid. Because I didn't have the experience required to get some of the more competitive paid roles. And I don't think that that was a bad thing, and I don't think I was exploited in any way. But at the same time, the natural progression for me was to move in my primary work away from unpaid roles towards paid roles when I had that experience, because it just seemed like an additional benefit to me. Yeah, I'm not sure if that helped as well. That's just, I guess, my experience.
I think it definitely does. And I think that the ability to have volunteer experience with work integrated learning, when we can bring the two together, which we've managed to do with some of our pilots, it gives the students the ability who are under time pressure to take that 40 hours that they're doing and still get that volunteer experience with the not-for-profit, but get course credit for it as well. So it gives them that immersive experience, and the experience that, you know, Harrison has spoken about with volunteering, but also by still completing their coursework. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of and the conversations we're having, we're seeing universities are seeing that value and they are seeking it out more. So they really favour the ability to have a not-for-profit providing a work integrated learning opportunity over a commercial work integrated learning opportunity. So it's great to see, because, you know, we're all about social impact, so we love seeing that. I think
Michelle, I think the other, just one thing to make, I think the other thing for us with PTE, with Pathway to Employment, is that because we understand that students are actually time poor as well as resource poor in terms of, you know, they're often, like Harrison said, juggling big commitments at university, having to work part-time. They're young people, they've got to have time for fun and socialization and all of that sort of stuff, time for family, time for friends. We've designed PTE so that it fits in with that. So the time commitment is not such an arduous commitment, that it's not an onerous commitment that it becomes unachievable. And by having the structure of the 12-week, it really helps to guide and hone in on that time that you have, because mentors are also time poor. I still mentor a couple of people in my own time. I work full time. I'm the mother of 2 young children. I sit on 2 not-for-profit boards, but, you know, like, I still only have 24 hours in a day. I don't have extra hours in the day compared to anyone else. So how do you make that fit in? By having some structure to the mentor-mentee relationship really helps. And I think that that's one of the things that I would encourage universities to think about, is that, you know, is what you're offering students in terms of mentoring focused and guided, or is it just, oh, go off and find someone and then they can, you know, that's the value of this program.
I was going to say that's absolutely the value of this program, is that piece. And that has been very heavy in the feedback that we've received as well. Again, thank you everyone for your participation today. I think that brings us to a lovely conclusion. Thank you to those of you who have stuck with us to the end. We really appreciate your time. And again, Harrison, Chris and Ipshita, thank you for being on our panel and for sharing your insights and for making time today, because it's really great to see this program grow and sort of, go out into the world and make a difference. So yes, thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to our conversations with you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.